My name is Camille Beaumont, and this is the story of how my younger sister opened 5 credit cards in my name over the course of a year, ran up almost $31,000 in debt, and how a single denied mortgage application unraveled everything she'd been hiding from our entire family. I want to start by saying that my relationship with my sister Adele had never been simple. She's 4 years younger than me, and growing up, I was always the responsible one: good grades, steady jobs starting in high school, the kind of kid who paid her own car insurance the moment she could. Adele struggled in ways our family never quite knew how to talk about openly, moving through a series of jobs that never stuck, relationships that ended badly, and a pattern of financial instability that our parents, and eventually I, found ourselves quietly bailing her out of more times than any of us wanted to admit. By the time this story begins, I was 31, recently promoted to a regional manager position at the healthcare company I worked for, and finally in a position, after years of careful saving, to start seriously looking at buying my first home. I'd spent nearly 6 years building my credit deliberately and carefully, understanding, the way anyone who's had to build financial stability from nothing understands, exactly how fragile and how valuable a strong credit history actually is. The first sign that something was wrong came when I applied for pre-approval on a mortgage, a process I'd researched extensively and felt genuinely prepared for, having checked my own credit report myself just 8 months earlier as part of my preparation, at which point everything had looked exactly as I expected: a strong score, a clean history, low utilization on my 2 existing cards. When my loan officer called me back after running my updated credit report, her tone was apologetic in a way that immediately told me something had gone wrong before she'd said a single specific word. She informed me that my credit utilization had spiked dramatically, that I was showing 5 credit accounts I didn't recognize applying for, and that my score had dropped enough to jeopardize the favorable rate I'd been expecting to qualify for. I remember the specific, disorienting confusion of that phone call, trying to process information that simply didn't match my own understanding of my financial life. I asked my loan officer to walk me through exactly what she was seeing, and she read off 5 credit card accounts, from banks I recognized as major national issuers, each opened within the preceding 10 months, with combined balances that, once I did the quick math in my head while still on the phone, came to just over $31,000. My first instinct, and I want to be honest about this because I think it's a common and understandable first instinct in this kind of situation, was to assume I was the victim of a stranger's identity theft, some criminal ring. Some data breach, some faceless bad actor who'd somehow obtained my social security number and personal information through means entirely disconnected from my actual life. I pulled my full credit report that same evening, requesting it directly from all 3 major credit bureaus, and began working through the process I assumed any identity theft victim would need to follow, documenting each fraudulent account, preparing to dispute them formally, and preparing to file a police report, a step I understood was typically required by credit card issuers before they'd formally investigate and remove fraudulent charges from a victim's account. It was while gathering documentation for that police report, specifically while requesting detailed account opening records from one of the 5 credit card companies, that the actual story began to reveal itself in a way I genuinely was not prepared for. The credit card company, as part of their fraud investigation process, provided me with the IP address and device information associated with the account's original application, information they're able to access and, once a fraud claim is opened, are willing to share with the affected account holder as part of resolving the dispute. I didn't immediately recognize the significance of what I was looking at. But my husband, Marcus, who works in IT and understands networking in a way I never have, glanced at the documentation and asked, almost casually, whether that specific IP address looked familiar to me. It did, once I actually looked closely and compared it against an old email Adele had sent me from her home internet several months earlier, an email whose header information, as it happened, I still had in my inbox from an unrelated exchange about a family event. The IP address matched. I want to describe the specific quality of the moment this realization landed, because it was genuinely different from any other difficult discovery I've ever experienced. This wasn't a stranger who'd stolen my information through some anonymous, impersonal breach. This was my sister, someone who had grown up in the same house as me, who I'd defended to our parents more times than I could count, who I'd personally lent money to on at least 3 separate occasions over the preceding several years, apparently opening credit accounts in my name from her own home internet connection. I did not confront Adele immediately. I want to explain the reasoning behind this decision, because I think it's important for anyone in a similar situation involving a family member rather than a stranger. Part of my hesitation was genuine, painful uncertainty. Was I actually sure, or was I building an elaborate theory out of one coincidental IP match that might have an innocent explanation I hadn't yet considered? But a larger part of my hesitation, if I'm honest, was the specific dread of what confronting a family member with this kind of accusation would do to my entire family, my parents especially, who I knew would be devastated regardless of how the situation ultimately resolved. I consulted, first, with a consumer protection attorney who specialized in identity theft cases, a step I took specifically because I wanted professional guidance before doing anything that might complicate my ability to actually resolve the fraudulent accounts and restore my credit, regardless of who turned out to be responsible. She advised me, clearly and directly, that identity theft committed by a family member is unfortunately common enough that credit card companies and law enforcement have well-established processes for handling it, and that the process for me, as the victim, remained essentially the same regardless of the perpetrator's identity: file a formal police report, submit fraud affidavits to each credit card company, and allow the legal process to run its course, rather than trying to resolve the underlying family situation informally in a way that might leave my own credit and financial standing unprotected. I filed the police report, providing the IP address documentation alongside the formal account details from all 5 fraudulent cards, and I want to note that I made a specific, deliberate choice in how I filed it. I reported the fraud itself, the unauthorized accounts opened in my name, without initially naming a suspect, since I wanted the investigating officer to reach an independent conclusion based on the evidence rather than one shaped by my own suspicion, a distinction my attorney had specifically recommended as both more procedurally sound and, frankly, more emotionally bearable for me in that moment. The investigating detective, once the case was formally opened, followed up directly with each of the 5 credit card companies, whose own fraud departments had access to more detailed technical records than what had been shared with me directly, including, in 3 of the 5 cases, records showing that the physical mailing address for the card's welcome packets and subsequent statements had been changed shortly after each account was opened, redirected to a P.O. box that, once the detective traced the box's rental records, was registered under Adele's name. I received a call from the detective about 3 weeks after filing my report, informing me that the evidence had led the investigation directly to my sister, and asking whether I wanted to proceed with pressing charges, a question that, even having already worked through the IP address discovery weeks earlier, still landed with a specific, heavy weight I hadn't fully prepared myself for. I want to be honest that this was the hardest decision in this entire story, harder than any of the financial or investigative steps that preceded it. I spent several days in genuine anguish, talking through the decision with Marcus, with my consumer protection attorney, and eventually, painfully, with my parents, who I felt I owed the truth before any formal charges moved forward. My parents' reaction, when I finally told them, was not the explosive family rupture I'd feared, though it was its own kind of devastating conversation. My mother cried. My father, uncharacteristically, said very little, though he later told me privately that some part of him had suspected, over the preceding year, that Adele's sudden ability to afford a nicer apartment and a series of expensive purchases didn't add up against what he understood of her actual income, a suspicion he admitted he'd chosen not to voice, hoping he was simply being unfairly harsh in his judgment of her. I ultimately decided to proceed with pressing charges, a decision I want to explain honestly rather than presenting as an easy or purely righteous choice. I did not make this decision purely out of anger, though anger was certainly present. I made it because I understood, once I'd researched the pattern more thoroughly, that identity theft within families, when left unaddressed through the actual legal system, tends not to resolve itself, tends instead to repeat, sometimes escalating, and I did not want to become someone who simply absorbed $31,000 of fraudulent debt and quietly protected my sister from consequences, only to discover, potentially years later, that the pattern had continued or expanded to affect other family members as well. Adele was charged with identity theft and financial fraud under our state's statutes, charges that, given the documented scope, 5 separate accounts, a redirected mailing address demonstrating clear intent to conceal the fraud from me for as long as possible, and a total amount that crossed the threshold into felony rather than misdemeanor charges in our state, carried serious potential consequences. She ultimately accepted a plea agreement that included probation, mandatory financial counseling, and a court-ordered restitution plan requiring her to repay the full $31,000 directly to me over a structured multi-year timeline, secured against her wages through a garnishment order the court approved given her employment history of instability. The credit card companies, once the police report and formal fraud affidavits were processed, removed all 5 fraudulent accounts from my credit history and reversed the associated debt, a process that took approximately 4 months to fully complete across all 5 issuers, delaying my mortgage plans by roughly that same period but ultimately restoring my credit profile to what it had been before Adele's actions had compromised it. My relationship with Adele remains, as I write this, in a place I'm not sure how to fully describe. We are not estranged, exactly, but we are not close in the way we might have been in some alternate version of this story where none of this happened. I see her at family gatherings. We are civil. The restitution payments arrive, according to the court schedule, and I use them, somewhat symbolically, to fund an emergency savings account I've started specifically because I never again want to be caught as unprepared as I was on that first phone call from my loan officer, discovering that the financial identity I'd spent 6 years carefully building had been quietly compromised by someone I never once imagined I needed to protect myself from. Adele built her scheme on an assumption that, I think, many people who exploit family trust rely on without ever fully articulating it to themselves, that the closeness of a family relationship makes formal, legal consequences feel unthinkable, that a sister would rather quietly absorb the damage than risk the family rupture that pressing charges might cause. She had no idea that the sister who'd spent years defending her to our parents, lending her money, and giving her the benefit of every doubt was also, underneath all of that loyalty, someone who understood exactly how to build a case, exactly how to protect herself methodically once she understood what she was actually facing, and exactly how to hold someone accountable even when that someone shared her own last name.